What are the 7 laws of success?
Our generation is also spoiled of choice.
What are the 6 habits to becoming a CEO? Leadership is not neat. What does it mean to lead in the era of AI?
It's not just AI, it is internet in general. A new influencer pops up every 3 days.
Women in leadership roles are less liked than men.
Just because this person is famous doesn't mean that everything that's coming out of their mouth is absolute truth.
Leadership has changed so much in the last 40 years that I have seen.
It's the era of influencers, as we say. Rupa, I want to start with you that you've written a book about going beyond the playbook for leadership. People like me, and I'm guessing most youngsters, get all leadership lessons from people we want to be like, from leaders we admire, leaders we idolize. We read all possible books about them to try and mimic them, to become apes of them, which is not the right way to go about it. And I was reading your fascinating book about how to draw that line between getting inspired by somebody and completely trying to ape them. How does your book suggest people should do that?
This book, what I would call a leadership companion. And to your question, it helps you answer the question, what kind of a leader do I want to be? And then craft your own path towards that. And it really came out of my own experiences over almost 40 years. Starting with visiting factory floors, sugar mills, steel plants, cement units, to setting up a pioneering credit rating agency, to moving on to tech and startups, impact investing, and along the way sitting on many boards. I had the opportunity to see, interact, and meet with many, many inspiring leaders. And one thing that taught me was that leadership is not neat. And yet any discussion about leadership very quickly becomes, what are the 7 laws of success? Or what are the 6 habits to becoming a CEO? Right? But real life doesn't work like that. Leadership is a very personal journey. It depends on what your experiences have been, what choices you have made in life, and what values you stand by. So I feel that while a lot of people can be a source for inspiration, ultimately each one of us has to have a distinctive approach to leadership based on who we authentically are. You can draw inspiration from others, you can emulate some things about others, but ultimately it's about being you. So the short answer to your question is, look to others for inspiration, but first answer the question, what kind of a leader do I want to be?
Kalyani, I want to come to you on that contrast. What Rupa mentioned is that she's met so many people who are inspiring, but that made her realize how important it is to be your own kind of leader. But being a young researcher, what do you think is the challenge in becoming that personal, in forming that personal style of your leadership or of your working style? Because, we currently in an age where we get inspired by even a reel that we're watching on Instagram. Forget even reading a book. We don't even need that kind of investment anymore. You watch a 30-second reel about a person's life, you immediately get influenced. It's the era of influencers, as we say. So how do you avoid that influence on yourself? How do you ensure that you see something, you watch something, you read something only for the inspiration part of it? What do you think is the challenge that's particular for our generation with so much information overload?
I think it's not just an information overdose that we're dealing with. I think it's also that our generation, particularly the one that is permanently on social media, like, at least millennials for that matter, if we were to go with that sort of a generalization, saw the landline culture, and then the internet, like I tell people I'm older than Google. And to a Gen Z, that is just bizarre because they're like, well, Google's always been around, but it's really not. It came in 97, right? So the idea that you have grown chronically on the social media, and also how social media, and so this is something that we do tend to overlook at times, is how fast social media has changed the world that we live in. I think it's been mentioned in the past discussions that we've had today. Multiple speakers have spoken about how quickly things are changing, right? And it's not just AI, it is internet in general. It's not just information overdose, but our generation is also spoiled of choice. There is just so much. and every time you're looking at a new reel, you're looking at a new YouTube video or a new influencer pops up every 3 days. Something is trendy now and 5 days later something else is trendy. What is dangerous about this, I think, is not just the fact that we're talking about fashion trends or dance reels. It's not. It's about genuine political, economic, social issues going on around the world which have become trend culture. And that is doing two things. One, that is sort of desensitizing us even more than we naturally are. It's also sort of putting us in a position where we don't know what to do anymore. So the idea of Instagram advocacy, to what end? Something is going on, and there is a geopolitical issue going on, and somebody wants to post something about it. But then what comes of that post, right? And the original idea of social media advocacy was naturally that you're spreading awareness. But now if your awareness is that fickle, that the next reel, the next trend will change your awareness immediately, then it entirely dissolves the point.
Right.
I think when coming back to your question, when you're talking about leadership and inspiration, I think it's very important as individuals that we are today to, one, cut the clutter. We really need to understand what sources we are getting our information from. We also really need to understand just because this person is famous doesn't mean that everything that's coming out of their mouth is absolute truth, or just because somebody has more followers. But I think at the heart of it, it is really important that as individuals, we really need to have a set of core principles that ground us. Because when you're constantly being overstimulated, all your senses, you open your eyes and the first thing you see is your screen. And regardless of what science is telling us and the fitness culture is telling us, that's exactly what we're doing, if regardless of whether, again, people admitted to it or not. So every time we're being sort of led into a certain direction, like, okay, is this me? Do I need to be here? Is this something that is going to define me? Is this something that's going to contribute to the kind of person that I want to be? And then maybe go ahead. So that call every individual needs to take for themselves. And I think for our generation, that's really important.
Right, that's a good point you've made. And Rupa, I want to come to you on that, not to be an ageist here, but I'm just saying that you came from a generation where fortunately you didn't have these challenges, but there were other challenges that your generation, of course, faced when you were entering the workspace. So we want to understand from you, how do you think all of this has changed the way an entrepreneur, the way a founder, or the way a CEO works? Because a few years ago, I recently read this somewhere, somebody said that few years from now, by choice or by force, everybody will have to be a content creator. All founders will have to be on the internet, CEOs will have to be on the internet to make their business visible, because it's unfortunately all about what's being seen. So how do you think being a CEO has changed over the last few decades, and how do you see it changing for the years to come?
Leadership has changed so much in the last 40 years that I have seen. Think about how much more it's going to change in the next 10 years. It is going to be so different. We cannot even imagine what it's going to look like. So here is my theory about what does a CEO in an AI age look like. Very different from the CEO of today. So for example, with AI doing a lot of data crunching, analysis, forecasting, etc., I think organizations will become, decision-making will become much more decentralized. Organizations will become much more delayered. And really, what a CEO will have to do now is decide about who does what so much, what the marketing strategy should be, whether it's from finance to creative industries to design, all industries are going to be dramatically altered. So I think the job of a CEO is 2 or 3 things. Number one, it is to be an AI strategist, which means where do I use AI, where do I not use AI? How do I look at the output of AI? What do I challenge? What do I question? What do I disregard? How do I deal with some of the risks that AI is creating? Risks of privacy, of quality of data. Amazon, for example, was using AI for recruitment, and that entire model had been trained using only male resumes. And then they saw the outcome of that was that women were not being hired because the model had not been trained that way. And so they discontinued that model. So these are the kinds of issues that a CEO of the future will have to deal. Number 2, ethical guardian. In AI, the whole question of ethics is going to become so important. Kalyani was talking about so much information you don't even know what is real. So what are the assumptions behind the model? How are you making sure you're not excluding people, particularly in a developing country like India? The exclusion bias of AI is something we have to be very careful about, because if we have to be Viksit Bharat by 2047, it has to be inclusive growth. Society is changing so rapidly. And a CEO cannot be immune from the changes of what's happening around her or happening around him. There is so many other influences. You have to find your voice as a leader, and you have to be able to create your own influence as a leader using tech, using the internet, all of that. So I think the people who can do that. So AI strategist, an ethical guardian, and an important societal influencer. I think this is what the CEO of the future will look like.
I want to pick on that word influence. How do you think the meaning of that word influence has changed?
In the typical social media parlance, who's an influencer is basically someone you try and emulate for their lifestyle, right? I'm not talking about that kind of an influencer, right? I'm talking about, especially in the context, the world of business, people who can shape the thinking. You have to be grounded in values. So every time a discussion or a dilemma or a strategy comes up for discussion, I think going back to first principles, what are we here for? What values do we stand by? And the ability to cut through the noise and get these messages across is what influencing in the context of the business world is going to be all about.
One more question from your answer, very interestingly. How do you think purpose positions in somebody's risk-taking appetite? If your purpose is big enough, does that make you a big enough risk-taker?
I think it goes beyond risk-taking, Priyanshi. It comes to day. There are so many young people I meet who have worked for 7-8 years, and they tell me, oh my God, my whole life is just one set of meetings after the other. My email box is overflowing. I feel burnt out. So now I want to move. I want to do something different. Take it from me in writing, your next place you move to, you will feel the same again. So I think the antidote to all of this is really purpose. When you understand why you're doing something, all of a sudden, those emails in your mailbox and one meeting after the others, they tend to nag you less because you understand that there's a deeper purpose behind it.
So Kalyani, I want to come to you on that. You've also tried to swim in different waters to finally realize that you want to be in impactful research that's not stuck to the boardrooms or to meetings, but that's actually implementable. So to get your thoughts on, as a young professional, how to get through that struggle of finding your purpose?
I think it is, I think that's a very good question, honestly, because I think our generation genuinely struggles with where do we need to end up. As I was saying earlier, one, we're spoiled of choices. The market is too big now. And the market is also a place where now you have the opportunity to create. And now with social media, as ma'am said, relatively everybody else's life looks great. What that has done is that now the idea of effort has somehow taken a backseat, because everything that you see on screen is just perfect, right? It's the perfect house, it's the perfect car, it's the perfect dress, it's the perfect partner, it's the perfect birthday party, whatever it is.
Because
right?
that's what they're showing you.
Exactly, right? So the idea that, what I mean by the idea of effort has taken a backseat is now you don't want to show anyone that you're trying, because trying doesn't look pretty on screen. That is something that is genuinely why the anxiety within our generation exists, is because if I'm doing this, I need to be best at it on day one. Otherwise, it wouldn't look pretty. But that's not how it works. As ma'am was talking about purpose, I think finding your own space also genuinely just goes back to your own roots. At least for me, what happened was when I entered the job market, it was in the peak of pandemic. And I was one of the lucky few to get a job when people across the globe were losing jobs. And what I remember doing then was I told them, I don't know your market, because I joined as, okay, this is a little bit of a small personal journey. I'm a humanities arts graduate for my undergraduation, and I did public policy at a time where everybody around me was like, but oh, that's bureaucrat's job. So what are you as a non-bureaucrat going to do with a public policy degree? And so I did that. And then I came back and I joined hardcore corporate consulting, because that was the job I was getting. I remember they were like, okay, but you don't know business and you don't know finance and you don't know any of these things. So how are you going to work in business consulting, right? And I'm like, I can write. I know I can write. I can read and I can write and the difference between me and ChatGPT is that you can verify my sources and you will not find mistakes there. And so when corporate consulting and the job market and everything else took a toll, I was like, I've taken my stunt at it, really, and because I enjoy reading and writing, and I still enjoy working with more social humanitarian issues. Like, I know that with how the world is developing and the coming of the AI and the technology, and you just had Meta give those, Ray-Ban collaboration sunglasses, and now you can, if anybody has been on the internet recently, with that going on, all we talk about is numbers. Money, numbers, how can you quantify something? And in that space, I was like, no, I want to work with qualitative things.
Right.
I want to talk about human stories.
Right.
I want to talk about if the US tariffs, sure, it's going to be a big hit on the job market, and so many percentage of people are going to lose their jobs, or so many percentage of people are going to be in loss and not profit. I also want to talk about the kind of mental toll that's taking on each of those individuals.
Right.
And that is what it means by coming back to your grounds and rooting yourself. And
it's beautiful how your story came back in circle. Another point that I want now come to before we close this session is how being a woman in the workforce has changed over the last few decades. And this is something that we were discussing before this panel discussion. How you said when you stepped into the workforce, there weren't even washrooms in your offices. But now a lot has changed. But it's important to mention that it's not all well. I think this is basis my experience, but even speaking to Kalyani and even speaking to you, from even the little comments that are made, from even the aspersions that are cast on a woman simply because she's doing better than everybody else in her team, then she must be doing some things under the table which must not be talked about. How do you think these kind of sort of implicit modes of sexism still exist in the workforce without those explicit ones of the washrooms not existing? How do you think, though that has improved, now we've evolved and changed our styles of how we project sexism in our corporate workspaces?
In the 40 years since I started working, there's been massive change, not just in terms of women in the workforce, especially the corporate world, women in middle management, and also attitudes towards women. I think the general awareness of the benefits of diversity is the highest that it has ever been, right? At least in the last 40 years. And let us not underestimate the importance of and significance of that. We are all of us, and particularly the youngsters like you, are standing on the shoulders of women who had made pioneering efforts to get us here maybe 50, 60, 70 years back, right? And I think sometimes we tend to lose sight of the fact. Are there problems today? Sure. Do biases exist? Sure. And is there a long way to go? Sure. But I think it is also important for us now, as we even talk about these topics, but to add more questions into the debate and add more considerations into the discussion, which is that the proportion of women in leadership roles, etc., has increased. And yet, when you look at the listed companies in India, and yet when you look at boards, yet when you look at Fortune 500 companies, for example, less than 10% of the CEOs are women. Now, what is it that is coming in the way of women rising from mid-management to senior management? The glass ceiling, and I think it's 2 or 3 important things. And I have a chapter exclusively on women's leadership in my book. And there are 3 things. I think the first of all, which is what I call the likability factor. Research after research has proven that women in leadership roles are less liked than men. The same qualities and traits that are seen as positive in a male leader are actually viewed negatively in a woman leader. There's this famous case study in a top business school in the US, for example, where they divide the class into 2. They give exactly the same case study of a CEO. In one case study, the CEO is called Harry. In the other, the CEO is called Harriet, right? So one is a man, and every word in the case study is exactly the same. And then the assignment given to the students is to comment on the qualities of the leader or some such thing. I don't know the exact details. And the group that actually got assigned, the Harriet, the woman, the all tonality of the comments was much more negative, where he is described as a visionary, she is described as overly aggressive. So I think the first is the likability factor, which leads to the second factor. All of us are human beings and we like to be liked. We all want to be liked. But if you feel that getting the top jobs is going to make you less liked, it makes you hesitate a little bit, even to apply for those jobs. So therefore, women, if you see a job description and a woman is meeting 6 out of the 10 characteristics, 10 requirements for the job, she'll say, oh, I don't meet 4 of these requirements, so I'm not going to apply. Whereas a man will see the same 10 and will meet the same 6 and will say, wow, I meet 6 of those requirements, so I'm going to apply, right? And again, this has been shown through research to be true. So you have less women, therefore the self-belief factor. And the last, I think, is self-advocacy. Women don't like to raise their hands and ask for the top jobs. And I think, there's a lot of debate on, oh, women, we have this problem and we have that problem. And those problems are there and we have to address them. The limited point I'm making, Priyanshi, is let's also move the debate a little bit to talking about these issues. Because it's only when women get to the top, it's only when more women get to the top that these issues will get resolved in the long run. So let's put our heart and soul into ensuring that wherever we are, we support other women. Earlier, I would feel, oh my God, supporting other women is anti-merit. Everyone tells you it's all about merit. Today, my views have changed. I say, of course, it is not anti-merit. It is about discovering where the merit lies and uncovering that merit so that we as an organization can benefit from a wide and deep talent pool. If you're a marketer, and we have famous marketers like Harish Bhatt here, for example, he will sit and analyze each customer segment, right? And understand what are the barriers for each one of them, what needs to be done so why should it be different for our employees? So I don't think it's anti-merit. I don't think it's bias in the reverse bias. I actually think it is pro-merit and uncovering more merit.
And very important that you mentioned that women like us are now standing on the shoulders of women who've reached those positions that give us inspiration. We can hope to become CEOs and founders because we've seen women like you leading global organizations. So none of this is discounting that. But Kalyani, the point that Rupa made is the conversation around biases needs to change. It's now not just about the washrooms, but also the conversations that are happening inside these meetings. For us to believe that no corner office or room is too far for women to reach, these conversations also need to change. So can you tell us a little bit about your experiences, whether you face something like this, what Rupa mentioned? If a man is confident and even arrogant, he's seen as a strong leader. If a woman is doing the same, she's seen as rude, dominating, intimidating, nobody wants to speak to her. Have you faced something like that? And how do you think institutionally this can change?
That's actually a very pertinent question. When you're talking about merit in a way as if the starting line is same for everyone, but it's not. We are 5 miles behind. So let us reach the starting point and then be like, sure, merit. Again, I've sort of put a very broad generalized statement, and there are multiple nuances to it, and one needs to understand the nuances when one is getting into this sort of a debate. But largely it is that. Just because you are working with a certain group, it's not because you're favoring them. It's because you're bringing them to the same platform so that then you can be like, okay, merit. To give you a small personal story, I have. I think I joined corporate consulting when I was 21 years old. And I was very, very young. And in one of my earlier projects, I was assigned task of working with the logistics sector of this country. For the same, I had to interview CEOs and CFOs, COOs, CTOs of logistic companies. Now, the thing is that the logistics sector in India is almost entirely male. And there are very, very few women, and definitely not in leadership positions in any of the logistic major organizations that you can find. In fact, starting from MSMEs.
Right.
Even if you're if you're somebody who owns a small company and you give out 10 trucks, and your company is sort of registered in Chandigarh, 99.99% it's a man. It's not a woman. And so I have entered meetings where my entry has been entirely dismissed individuals have just continued talking to themselves because they are still under the assumption that, oh, an intern has walked in and the actual guy is supposed to walk in later. You know, and so I've been in those rooms. Personally felt that I need to try harder, sound smarter, appear more confident about every word that I'm saying, just so I can convince these group of men that, oh, I'm not talking gibberish. And I think, and I think that's not an experience to me which is personal. I think almost every woman who is there in the job market has faced it in one way or another.
Yes.
You know, whether it is with your manager or your boss or a client or your team member or absolutely anybody. Those things are there. Now, coming to the question of how will this change institutionally, I think it goes back to the same thing I was talking about earlier, which is we've made the jump, and as ma'am was saying, we're, in the last 40, 50 years in the market, we are where we are to the fullest. So we've made the jump of the tangible and the material, which is we have those policies in place, we have those regulations in place, we have told the men that, okay, we need washrooms and we need our own sitting spaces and we need these laptops and we are smart enough and so on and so forth. But I think the real work now is with the soft, which is the own internal mentality of an individual, an organization, a state, a country, and then people at large, which is we need to work on ourselves, and men more so than women, and be like, okay, they're not different. In the job market, them and I are exactly the same. And that really needs to change.
Right, and I agree with you on that point. The effort that we have to put to be taken seriously. I've heard things like, oh, she's looking too good, she's put on too much makeup, she must not be very smart. So I've serious. I've second guessed myself while putting lipstick or makeup. Is this going to make me look less serious? Which is bizarre. These are not the kind of questions that we should have. So these are the things that now need to change, apart from the policies and the things that have changed on paper. Fantastic thoughts, that too coming from two women who are currently in industries that have been far dominated by men. You're coming from Crystal, leading an analytics organization, now tech, and Kalyani coming from research. Fantastic thoughts. Now we want to come to a quick rapid fire with which we'll wrap this discussion. One leadership myth that you want to throw out of the window.
I think it would be that leaders need to have all the answers. Actually, leaders need to be able to ask the right questions.
Right.
I think, and also give space for others to shine.
And if leadership had a one-word synonym, what would it be?
Empathy.
Oh. Worst piece of leadership advice that you've ever heard?
I would again go back to the same thing that you need to have all the answers. That's the very deep-rooted belief that leaders need to know it all. Actually, far from the case.
Kalyani, if women ruled all Fortune 500 companies, what's the first thing that would change?
Period leaves and compulsory childcare.
Oh, I would love to get your answer on that as well.
I think you would see new leadership styles coming in. It's a myth that women have just one leadership style. I can name 5, 6, 7, 8 women leaders, and each one has a different leadership style. I think would add variety to the kind of dominant leadership styles that we have today.
Kalyani, the most annoying stereotype you faced as a woman researcher?
I think my citation list gets double-checked every single time.
Okay. The most sexist comment that you've heard at work?
So when I was in project finance, the number of industrialists and promoters who would come, I used to be the appraisal officer, but they would come to me and say, where's your boss? Because they used to think that I'm the secretary.
Oh, so that has really seeped through generations. That's exactly what Kalyani was talking about. Okay, so if workplaces truly became equal tomorrow, what would men complain about? What do you think?
I think men will have to start working harder.
Lovely. I think we should end this conversation on that note. Thank you very much, ladies. Thank you for being fantastic audience. Thanks, everybody.